All right, my name's Darryl, and we've got Carrie here. Carrie Griffin with the Salt Group. She's going to be doing the lion's share of the conversation today because it's actually her case study. I'm with VanillaSoft, and I want to kind of kick things off here. A couple things. How many people in this room are 100% happy right now with your sales performance, your productivity, your activity, your results? Put your hand up. Nobody. All right. How many people here know how to fix it? Hand up. Wow, you guys are really active. Come on. Work with me here. Carrie was faced with a similar situation. I'll let her tell her story, but she was tasked with having to hit some pretty impossible accomplishments. As the headline says, talked about doubling their sales operations performance. So imagine what you're doing now, and your leadership comes to you and says, you need to be not 1.25, not 1.5, you need to be 2 times better than you're doing now. And your contribution is going to have a dramatic impact on the company and where we go next. You're empowered, but you've got to deliver. When that happens, that's pretty stressful. There's a bit of a crosshairs on your forehead, and you kind of sit back and you wonder, how am I going to do that? Carrie went through this, and she went through that exact same situation. She's going to talk about it. Before we go, before I pass the baton over to Carrie where she'll share it, and this is interactive, so if you have a question, don't be shy. Reach forward and ask us. A couple things. What I want to tell you is this. We're going to see if you're paying attention. So inside this wonderful backpack that is, you may notice it's got a wonderful VanillaSoft label in it, there's goods and tchotchkes in here. There's a charger, there's hats, a whole bunch of good stuff inside here. At the end of Carrie's presentation, I'm going to ask a question. First one to give me the right answer, and if I see your hand, you get this. So that's your incentive to kind of pay attention, all right? Any questions? We're good? All right, so with that, Carrie, over to you. I shall advance your slides for you, and I will keep you on time.
Okay.
Soon as, can we have our slide deck? There we go, okay, back it up. All right, so that's us, and over to you, Carrie. And I love this. We're gonna kick it off with Carrie's Texas love story. This is my favorite slide in the whole deck.
It's a little quirky. So a little background. I retired from Dell a few years ago, and when I left, I was responsible for the customer service call centers globally. So had a pretty daunting task. Learned a lot in my almost 16, 17 years at Dell. And one of them was to constantly always be optimizing, getting lean, and improving the customer experience, driving sales, all that good stuff. I retired from Dell, and during that process, I actually met this guy who owned this company, a small business, service, expense reduction, consulting company, nothing really sexy compared to Dell. But long story short, he talked me out of retirement and asked me to come and join him in his small company in San Antonio and make some things happen. Indirectly, I ended up getting married to him prior to agreeing to go work for him, and that was kind of part of the deal. As I said, you know, you can't afford me, and he said, well, how about if I marry you, and then you can just come work for me and own half the company. And I thought, well, okay, that sounds pretty good. I'll go ahead and do that. So long story short, that's how I got involved and engaged in the SALT group, and was able to actually triple the revenues in the 3 to 5 years after I started the program. One of the tasks that the owner of the company, AKA my husband, put me with was to say, I need to double the sales, I need to cut the cost in half, and oh, by the way, we have this attrition issue with our agents at the call center, and you need to maybe do something about that while you're at it. So one of the things that I was very well trained in doing was going in and assessing what we had first to figure out what I needed to change, what things I could tweak and modify and improve. And during that process, I discovered very quickly that I was going to have to change almost everything in that company. Which, have you ever gone to an owner, an entrepreneur of a company, and told them their baby is ugly? it's not very pleasant. So there were a lot of a lot of heated discussions, but basically went through and identified that we needed to change the way that we generate our leads, the way that we manage our operations, and the rest would flow.
Part of the challenges you had there too, though, wasn't just that you had, shall we say, systems that were antiquated and they weren't meeting your needs, was that even if you wanted to make changes, you were somewhat held hostage in that front, were you not?
Yes, very much so.
How so?
One, from a financial standpoint, I mean, we're a small to medium-sized company, didn't have a lot of money to invest in a complete change. There was also a big culture shift. One of the first things that I did was give everybody Who Moved My Cheese book, because you had all these people that had been with his company, small company, grown up with his company, that didn't want any kind of change at all. But the issues were primarily around kind of cost and ease of use. And there were so many things that we had to go in and fix, and it was hard to kind of identify where to start.
And so for context, so your expertise is on processes. You yourself are not a programmer or a sales and ops person. Would you describe yourself as such?
Ops, yes.
Ops in the pure operational sense, but you're not sitting there in the dashboard and making screen changes and process flows.
No, I'm not an
That's
IT
your background.
person at all. Yeah, we had hundreds of thousands of people at Dell that did all that stuff.
We had people for that.
We have people.
And now
that
you
was
were
one
the
of the first
people.
things that I walked in and I said,
Exactly.
don't you have people for this? You know,
Yeah.
and he said, yeah, you're looking at them. We are the people. So there were a couple of things. Obviously, first and foremost, it had to be user-friendly. And it had to be really, really easy to customize. It had to be somewhat inexpensive. But we also needed to make sure that it could scale, because one of the objectives was that we wanted to double, if not triple, our growth in, you know, a 2 to 5 year time frame. So it was, you know, a fine balance between all of those things.
So what's interesting about this is I'm sure you've all seen these lists before, right? They're almost like motherhood, apple pie statements. You must be user-friendly. But you had a real need for it to be user-friendly because of the nature of the call center aspect and the users.
Yeah, we, like with most call centers, have a good diverse group of people that come in. There's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of churn. It's cold calling. It's outbound call center at its finest. And you get all types of certain people in there. So I needed to make sure that it was something that was going to be really easy for the common person to be able to use and get up and running and be comfortable with.
How much time did you spend originally training a new employee on your systems to get them up and running?
Well, we had Goldmine. I don't know if anybody is familiar or heard of that horrible thing. We would spend in training 3 weeks minimum just on training them how to use the system when they were making outbound calls. And then we would spend, you know, another couple of weeks actually talking about content and the pitch and how to overcome objectives and all that other stuff. But the majority of the training time was spent just teaching them how to maneuver through this system that we had.
And at that point in time, you're, you know, a month to 2 months into it, and you don't really know yet if they're actually going to be good on the phone to doing their
No, so
job.
there was a huge investment that we made with these people up front, because at the time we were 100% commission with these guys, but for the training period we would pay them, you know, an hourly fee while they were getting through training, and then only to discover after we've invested a couple of months in them did we find out they really weren't that good, and we would, you know, turn them over and bring in a whole new
and do it all over
class.
again.
Yeah.
And the other challenge about future requirements is that it's by its nature, you don't know what the future holds. So you need to be able to scale, but, you know, how do you define that? So you've got a mandate to figure something out that can work with you, even though you don't know what that's going to be necessarily in the future.
Yeah, and I needed something that was really agile, and that we were able to kind of, because there was this other thing, if you had a really good proven process and that you just needed to find a new tool in which to lay your process out. But I was dealing with, I think the processes that we had were fundamentally broken in addition to the tools that we were using. So I needed something that I was going to be able to adjust and change very quickly on the fly as we got going. through
So
the
that's a really
program.
big conversation here. As you look at doubling your own performance, are you looking at your processes as much as you're looking at your tools, as much as you're looking at your people and onboarding them to actually utilize the process?
And you got to balance all three.
You got to balance it all.
Yeah.
Right. So you had all this was kind of, I'm walking in and this is what I got to face. So what did you end up doing?
Yeah. Again, it was one of those things where he wanted it done yesterday.
The boss wanted it done yesterday.
Yes. And I said that, we needed to step back and really do a thorough investigation and research on to what our options were. So we went with all the, went and talked to and looked over, I think it was like a 14-month process. You don't have to do it near as extensive as that, but we looked at Salesforce, we looked at Microsoft Dynamics, and then we also looked at VanillaSoft during this whole process. Interestingly enough, we weren't only having to figure out how to manage the call center and the cold calling process. We were also trying to figure out how we were going to redo the entire back end. So our whole job tracking system, I mean, everything was built off of 10 different platforms. A lot of it was custom homegrown stuff. So we weren't just talking about the front end. I was talking about having to do, the financial systems, everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
What I liked about this, and this is your decision, but you made this comment to me when we were prepping for this presentation, and it's there as a quote on the screen, which was the biggest problem with other tools, because Salesforce.com, I mean, it's a beast. It's got a beautiful third-party app exchange aftermarket. It's got a huge consulting practice. There's no lack of capabilities, no lack of knowledge. But your point here was interesting, is they weren't plug and play, and they needed huge development efforts to customize them, third-party components, external consultants, and that's the antithesis of what you wanted or needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just so that everyone knows, we did end up going with Salesforce and VanillaSoft. So Salesforce gave us what we needed as a base platform, and we actually went in and developed our entire job tracking system. We went and purchased Financial Force and integrated it in on the back end for billings and all that other stuff. But on the front end, Salesforce had the shell of what we needed, but we were going to have to go in and build the whole appointment setting, lead gen process within Salesforce. And so that's one of the things that I quickly identified, because again, I wasn't from IT, so I didn't know all the things that go into choosing something like this. But Salesforce would come in and say, we've got this great platform, and we've got all these other partners that integrate with us. And so we went in and looked at, do we go in and custom build our own lead gen appointment setting process within Salesforce, or do we partner with inside sales? Or, there were like 4 or 5 other ones that are fully integrated with Salesforce to look at. And then, like I said, at the time, we were also looking at VanillaSoft because, quite frankly, we saw the demo of VanillaSoft and just said, this is exactly what we need. We don't have to do anything to it. We could just kind of plug it in and go from scratch and just make a few modifications and we're ready to go. We even went as far as going to the Microsofts and the Salesforces and saying, can you build what VanillaSoft has?
Yeah.
And it was going to be, yeah, sure, we can do that, but it's going to be pretty costly. So we ended up going and getting VanillaSoft for our front end, which integrates with Salesforce.
So a big part of the Salesforce thing, you talked about, there's some features that were relevant for you because, for context for the audience, you've got lead generation specialists that are basically your inside sales development reps, if you will. And then you've got your field, your outside agents or your account execs or BDRs who are actually doing face-to-face meetings on the road.
Correct.
And so for you needed to actually route their leads and their appointments not only based on a certain geography, because I'm landing tomorrow in Boston, who am I going to talk to, but also based on other lead prioritization rules and in the order I meet these people, so that's how you wanted to get them, knowing they're going to Boston. So you had to work backwards on the lead generation side and hook that all up for them.
Correct.
Which is a unique challenge.
Yes, very.
So the other thing was, you said Salesforce was very task-centric. That's a Salesforce term. Everybody's always making a task. Where VanillaSoft is a different approach. They call it result codes. So we're going to come back to that because that was an important decision. There was two things that stuck out for me in our conversation. You like result codes were huge for you, and lead status was huge for you in managing your all processes. So these are some of the things that you were looking at.
Yeah. We wanted something that was really easy. You've got hundreds of agents sitting at a desk making cold calls out to clients, and we wanted something that we could get to the lead, get to the contact, set an appointment for our guys out in the field, and then move on to the next call. And we used to do kind of on average, we would maybe place 100 calls and convert maybe 10 of those to appointments. And once we implemented VanillaSoft and its result code-based orientation, we were able to double the amount of calls that we made. We were able to double the amount of appointments that we set. And then from the appointments that we set with the guys out in the field, that means they're able to go out and reach more clients in a given trip and able to convert more sales, thus generating the additional revenue.
What I liked about this quote here was you shared with me, I needed to know how often an agent was having an engaging conversation. So your simple math, you said to me on the phone, if they're making 150 calls a day, I talk to 10 people, 80 of those are saying go away. The balance of 20% might be meaningful, but did you know that detail at the time?
You had a lot of agents who had been there a while that would kind of give you their gut on what was going on, but we really didn't. I come from the school of if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and there was no real good measurement tools or reporting with what we had. And with the simple use of the result codes and the lead statuses, we're able to generate reports that tell us everything we could possibly want to know about the actions and the activities of a particular agent, the actions and activities of a particular client. And then with that, we were able to go in and better help train the agents, because we could go in and identify what are the areas that they're having problems with. Is this a person who has a really big problem with getting through the gatekeeper? Or is this somebody that can get through the gatekeeper and establish a relationship with the client but just can't close? And so by going in and using these result codes, we were able to quickly identify what the areas of opportunity were with each of those agents and go in and give them some good quality training to help them be more successful.
So this is kind of building on what you were just saying. The implications of not knowing that data was you didn't know who the good reps were. You didn't know who to train or what to train them on. You didn't know any of that information, which is what you were struggling with. And I love what you said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Now, we talked about result codes a few times. So this is a bit of a head shifter if you're not sure. Anybody here not familiar with Salesforce or CRM and the concept of tasks? Where you go, if you're a sales rep or anybody else who's in the system, and you manually make a task to do something, to follow up, to make a call. So the premise there, if you're a sales rep and you make an outbound call and they say, call me back in 2 months' time, you go and you manually make that task, says, it's on my calendar, call them back in 2 months' time. Or if you don't get a hold of them, now the sales rep is just arbitrarily saying, I'll try them in 24 days. Yeah, that's when I'll try them in. But it requires a manual process with no controls over that task other than any training you put with the rep on this is what we want you to do. That's what a task is. Result codes are the complete opposite. We eliminate the whole concept of any kind of manual consideration by the agent or by the rep or by the revenue team, which basically is it's a standard list of actions that, and I say standard, it's standard to the users. You make the actions. You define them, which is all part of the process, because you have to know what your process is to know what the actions are. So you got to work backwards in the process first. But then you say, these are the codes. And when I finish a call, I pick the right code. And based on that code, the system simply now knows what happens next. So it says two things. This code will denote what took place in this call, left a voicemail. And it says, and here's the next step. You should call back in a week's time or whatever. So that's the premise of a result code. So now there's no guessing. You train them once, they do a drop down or result code, click it, that record's gone, no manually creating tasks, and that's how you were able to double your productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to give you a simple example, an agent calls to a client and the person is busy. I can't really talk to you right now. How about you call me back in a couple of weeks when I'm available? There's a result code that we created, and it's just a simple click, and all they do is hit on that callback result code, and it immediately takes care of everything else after that. Now, of course, you have to set what the actions are that you want to take place once they hit that result code, but it takes all of that out of their responsibility.
Right.
And it automatically goes in, creates a callback on a specific date, specific time, and then takes that lead and puts it back into their queue at that date and time. And they could be in the middle of a conversation with another client 2 weeks later, and that's going to pop up on their screen and tell them, as soon as you get off of this call, this lead is going to immediately pop up because you need to go and have a conversation with this person.
And that's not optional. They can't dismiss it. It's like, you have to deal with this.
Yes.
Which is very different from a CRM interface where it's all list-based. Here's your list of tasks. And I can cherry pick, and reps do that all the time. You know, if I have, you know, ABC Manufacturing, IBM, and Joe's Garage, I'm going to call IBM, even though they're second on the list, not first on the list. That's gone, result codes. The thing that's different about result codes, unlike tasks, if you're trying to do the analytics that you were trying to do, I can't go and do a search on tasks to find trends. How often are they waiting to make that next call? Are they making that next call? Yada, yada, yada.
And the paragraph of notes.
And the paragraph of notes. Yeah. Where with result codes, you can do as many reports and queries and filters as you want to based on those specific codes to get the data you want to. So there's no guessing.
Right.
And that gives you the information that you needed.
Absolutely.
All right, so talk to us about how that optimized your activity.
Well, and then we've talked about a lot of this. So it was able to tell us very quickly at a high level, and then we could go down and deep dive into each of those areas, what happened with every single call. How many times are we actually being able to reach a client? How many times are we actually talking to a client and they're telling us to go take a hike versus, hey, we're interested, but you need to get back with us at a later time, versus, yeah, I'm really interested, let's set up a time for me to meet with your consultant. It gave us the ability to go in and tweak those things that we knew we needed to adjust, whether it be the pitch of the agent or the training of a particular thing, or just a lot to do with the client. Were we really attacking the wrong set of leads? Did we have the wrong decision makers that we were having a discussion with? I mean, we went through some analysis to say, what is the title of the person the majority of the time when we're getting go take a hike? I mean, as granular as that, so that we can go in and make decisions on who we should be reaching out to if it's somebody that we're constantly getting negative feedback on.
So the big thing with the result codes, a couple from your point of view, because you started off with saying, here's my mission, I have to double at least in the next 3 to 5 years. I've got people I have to work on. I got systems that aren't scaling, and it's costing us too much money to onboard them, yada, yada, yada. Whereas now, with this approach, you were able to do a couple things that are really compelling to the audience, which is going to be, one, is you're able to enforce user behaviors. In other words, they had to call, and the classic sales rep, the stats out there are for every, all the leads that marketing makes, 48% are never contacted. If they are contacted, they're contacted twice. Yet we know statistically they need to be contacted 6 to 8 times, minimally. The result codes eliminate those bad behaviors that tasks cause. Tasks are the reason they only call them twice, because they either ignore the task or they don't ever call them back.
Right.
And they cherry pick on the list. The list is gone, the task is gone, the result codes force that behavior. Now they're calling them 6, 8, 10, 12 times.
It's a queue-based routing.
It's queue-based routing.
So it forces the lead to them, and they have to go in and make that call and result that lead before they get another opportunity put in front of them.
You know where to invest your time in coaching, and you can show them the stats to say, here's how you're comparing versus the industry versus your peers, and this is why we're going to focus on this area, yada,
Absolutely.
so on. Yeah, and that's huge. All right, so I guess this is more of an outcome. So what has this done from a pure cause and effect, this approach?
Lots of good golden nuggets. Some of the stuff that we weren't even planning on getting residuals from that came out of this process. So first and foremost, we cut the cost of our appointment in half. And we're still continuing to optimize that process. So that was huge for us because cutting that cost in half gave us the ability to take that money and invest it in growth. The other thing is that a byproduct of this was also our ability to go out there and send our sales reps to more appointments. The more appointments that our sales rep goes out to, assuming that their conversion rate stays pretty similar, that generated more sales. So we were growing, 30 to 40% year on year for the last, 3 to 5 years, and it all is in direct relation to that.
Right.
Definitely.
Now, we start off by saying, though, that you couldn't afford the expensive help, the expensive talent of customization and consultants. So, but you've grown 30, 40%, so your processes have clearly evolved and changed. So how have you addressed that now?
There's not a lot to address because it's so simple.
It's so simple.
It really is. So I'm an accountant by trade, and then I've had supply chain management experience and customer service experience and sales ops experience, but never IT. I couldn't write a code if you asked me to. And I developed the entire call center.
And the nice thing is because you
program.
viewed it from a process-centric basis.
Yeah,
it wasn't a tool, it was a process.
Yeah.
The tool adapted to your process as opposed to you adapting to the tool.
Yeah. So I have one database manager that I utilize, and it's a 300-person agent call center. So we don't have to have a lot of support infrastructure to support
massive.
it.
All right, quick and dirty, lessons learned.
I think one of the first things that I learned very quickly is I was so quick to go in and implement something that I had to force myself to take a step back and identify the processes, and then through that go in and figure out what things should we continue with before we implement and what things do we need to do away with. So there was a lot of change management activity that took place before we even went to the implementation. The other thing is that I was so excited, I got a little result code happy.
You got zealous with your result codes, way too many?
And so next thing I know, I turned around and I had like 20 result codes for an agent. Okay, any of you guys dealt with an agent, you want to minimize the amount of options that they have, or they could just, you get consumed with it. So going back and taking a look and saying, okay, I don't want to boil the ocean here. What are the average 5 scenarios that an agent would run into when they're on a call with a client?
I love it. So overall, a very pragmatic approach, process-centric, using the tools to adapt to your process, a lot of forethought, which resulted in a scalable system because you thought about it in advance.
Yeah, and scalability is huge because it's one of the things that you really need to be thoughtful around is you want to make something that is very prescriptive, very controlled, because you can't continue to go and hire a lot of people if you don't have a system that is in a controlled environment that doesn't give them a whole lot of options.
So net was, by doing this approach, looking at the behaviors, looking at the systems, looking at the processes, working back, mapping the tool that met your requirements. So in other words, taking that time up front to be systematic, you were able to hit a 30 to 40% growth rate in a services-centric business, which never grows that high. You're able to lower your lead acquisition costs by more than 50%. And you were able to increase employee retention. And the difference now in your employee onboarding, how long does it take now to get an employee trained on the system?
2 hours.
2 hours, all right.
Yeah.
So with that all said, where did Carrie work before the SALT group? Who said Dell first? It's yours, good call. There we go. If you have any questions, Carrie's here, so I'd love to answer them. Thank you for your time today, folks.
Thank you.